foolish Republic scum! Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields!
What's up, MetaNerds? This will be a complete breakdown of the Providence-class Dreadnought, one of the most important ships in the CIS Navy. We'll look at everything from firepower, complement, capacity, and how it shaped the Clone Wars. Specific ships like the Invincible, Lucid Voice, and Invisible Hand, and even how the scraps of these ships would come to haunt the Imperial era, an attempt to destroy Tarkin's rise to power. But first, I want to thank Established Titles for sponsoring this video, and making me a true lord. My Isles ancestors are surely looking on with pride, especially since Established Titles works as a fun way to preserve the natural woodlands of Edelston, Scotland, and restoration efforts all around the world, planting a tree with every order. How it works is that you purchase a title pack for at least 1 square foot of dedicated land, coming with a unique plot number, and works through a Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English, and so you can use your new title on credit cards, plane tickets, or throw it on your dating profile. You get this neat plaque which even has your own crest, and it makes for a great last-minute gift, while keeping these wild areas from being industrialized, and helping global charities like One Tree Planted and Trees of the Future, which honestly is more than a lot of other lords and ladies can brag about. The first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will effectively be next to my plot, so we can establish our own little MetaNerds kingdom. And to make it even better, Established Titles is running a massive Black Friday sale right now, and if you use code MetaNerds, you get another 10% off on top of that. Go to establishedtitles.com/MetaNerds to get your gifts now and help support the channel. This capital ship was both designed and constructed by the Quarren of the Free DAC Volunteers Engineering Corps, with collaboration in some parts coming from Rendili Star Drive. The Quarren shared their home-world DAC with the Mon Calamari, and like the old phrase says, coral sharpens coral, or something like that. And just as the Mon Calamari were famed for being the best engineers in the galaxy for most of history, so much so that their prowess would end up providing the Rebel Alliance with a powerful edge, their rivalry drove the Quarren to be excellent shipwrights also. At the time of the Clone Wars, the tension between these two species came to a head. Mon Calamari had always seen themselves as the more wise and peaceful of the two, and the galaxy seemed to agree, with almost all political power and wealth ending up in the hands of the fish folk, not the Squidbillies. So it's a small-scale example of what happened to the galaxy as a whole, with the secession of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and Dooku knew that the Quarren would make for a natural ally. This secession occurred about 2 years before the war officially broke out, and while the founding of the Free DAC Volunteer Engineering Corps is stated at 22 BBY, we can assume that construction of these massive warships began at a time when it was still illegal under Republic law. Mon Calamari shipyards could pump out a Star Cruiser in 6 months, and the Empire at its peak was claiming anywhere from 3 months to 2 years to build an Imperial Star Destroyer. So let's say around a year for a Providence, likely constructed in those years leading up to the Battle of Geonosis. The Quarren shipyard was located on the planet Pamant, which already had a several millennia-old colony of anti-Calamarians, and these Pamant docks would be a main shipyard for the Confederacy, producing almost all of the capital ships, including the experimental Malevolence. The Providence cost 125 million credits, while it seems that the larger version that is twice its size, like the Invincible, cost 400,585,000 credits, which is more than twice the Imperial Star Destroyer. Powered by 3 Crevield 4 radial ion engines, which were made by Nubia Star Drives, the producer of most of Naboo's ships. These top-of-the-line engines reached a max acceleration of 2,500 G and 70 megalight per hour, with a top atmospheric speed of 2,000 kilometers per hour, which made it faster than almost all starfighters, and would leave other capital ships in the dust, while being more than twice the Venator, which was known for its speed. And though the Venator was quicker in hyperspace, the Class 1.5 hyperdrive puts the Providence right in between the Venator and ISD. To achieve this, the entire aft section was filled with primary and auxiliary reactors, while there were also subsidiary reactors and hyperdrive fuel silos located towards the bow, right below the command bridge, which provided a 180-degree view of the battlefront, and was packed with the best sensor and navigational equipment credits could buy, as well as a suite of dedicated computers to track everything going on inside of the Providence, track the starfighters connected on the surface of it, and of course how they were deployed out in space. With scanners that could reach out to search through entire solar systems and send out encrypted messages through hyper relays all across the galaxy in an instant, with incredibly complex arrays filling up this spire, an area that was connected by 5 turbolifts, with the uppermost part of the spire containing the private quarters of the warship's commanding officer. On Dooku's Providence, they nicknamed it the Wizard's Tower, as he would set it up like a meditation chamber. And just like how Sidious could choke out people via holo, Dooku would try to radiate his will into populations through a unique form of propaganda that combined force suggestion and high-tech broadcast equipment. In the Old Republic times, there was the practice of battle meditations, where powerful force users could increase the will of their fighters.
Bastila is no longer using her battle meditation against us. The tide has turned.
So it's interesting to wonder if the Providence was ever used for this purpose during the Clone Wars. Like the rounded shapes of the Mon Cala craft, the Quarrens used a streamlined modular design to construct the Providence, with a large cylinder at the center, and then more tubes to circle around that one, cutting away where they connect to create a really powerful and aerodynamic design. A unique geometry that dispersed the weight better than most competitors. And just because they spent a lot of time in space, all warships were still designed to travel through diverse planetary atmospheres as well, with emergency deceleration panels that can be used to rapidly slow down, so that if you wanted to, you could take full advantage of its speed and slam the brakes with a combo of reversing the thrusters. And this isn't explicitly stated anywhere, but most ships could also go underwater, especially the Mon Calamari design, and so it's reasonable to think that's true for the Quarren designs as well. This hull is also covered in hundreds of smaller sensors and comms that work to communicate with the droid starfighters, that could connect to just about anywhere on the outside of the ship for quicker deployment, or if the mission required them to pack on short term while you really filled up that hangar.
General Grievous' ship is directly ahead.
The one crawling with Vulture droids.
But besides that, the standard complement was 120 Vultures, 120 Tri-Fighters, 10 Hyena bombers, usually all lining the hangar and connected to overhead racks, while right underneath this section is where the 160 MTTs, and roughly 280 vehicles in any combo of AATs, Hailfire droids, OG-9 Spider droids, and M9 432 Crab droids. With all these land vehicles usually packing into a C-9979 landing craft that transferred down to a planet's surface like with the Lucrehulks. The 900 crew members included organic officers, but was mostly droids, while it could transport 48,247 passengers, which is how these things were used for a great PR role when they evacuated whole settlements from the lawless pirates or corrupt Republic forces. And along with them, they had 1.5 million deactivated, stored battle droids packed in as well, with a 18,000 metric ton cargo capacity, which was used to move war materiel or relief aid for CIS worlds. The weapon systems and shielding were powerful enough to match, designed to be so strong that a single Providence could maintain a planetary blockade through expert use of the starfighter complement, speed, and firepower. Many of these guns were charged at a higher rate, and the number of guns in each battery were designed to pierce through the deflector shields of most ships out there. With its 14 port and starboard heavy quad turbolaser cannons, 34 dorsal and ventral turret mounted dual heavy laser cannons, 12 port and starboard twin light point defense ion cannons, and 2 forward-mounted battleship heavy ion cannons, as well as 102 proton torpedo launchers, with each carrying 3 torpedoes. And then you had 12 heavy flak guns and 10 heavy tractor beam emitters placed along its port and starboard side, which all makes for a brilliant and great purpose-built Dreadnought. Remember, it is incredibly fast, and its speed would be shocking to even the most veteran pilots out there, something that forced the Republic to play catch-up early on in the war. All these heavy-rated weaponry are for punching through capital ships while leaving the anti-starfighter role to the point defense cannons, using less energy since they are just ion cannons, and so they could leave an enemy starfighter or vessel dead in space, letting the Vultures or Hyenas blow them to bits, allowing for the Providence to focus on the main enemy craft. The 2 heavy ion cannons are forward-facing, for a full steam-ahead attack that would short out the enemy shield generators and unleash its proton torpedoes, with that large forward beak-like rostrum for ramming into a ship if the need arose. If the enemy was to the side, the heavy cannons could overwhelm the shields, and let the port or starboard tractor beams keep the target in place for a barrage of torpedoes and then let the droid fighters swarm and envelop them. While on defense, this enormous credit investment was protected by a state-of-the-art thermal shielding, which was able to handle long barrages of even heavy turbolaser fire. Now there were some variants like the Providence carrier, which enlarged this hangar, likely stripping away the passenger and maybe even the B-1 droid troop sections, as well as the simply named larger model, which is almost exactly double the size of the standard version. At 2,177.35 meters long, or 1.35 miles, it was nearly twice the Venator, longer than an ISD, but still half that of a subjugator. Having a supersized version of the same ship might seem odd, but they did the same thing with the Requisite too. And the standard size Providence was actually shorter than the standard Requisite, despite being more powerful, while being less than half as wide as a Venator and about 1.5 times taller, though that height is mostly in these spires. And if it showed up here on Earth, it would be between the height of the Eiffel Tower and Empire State Building. You'll see as we look through its history that it is often the command ship of large CIS fleets, being the home base using its vast array of sensors and protective cloud of fire to act like a fortress, a wall other CIS vessels could retreat behind if need be, and from which the commander would coordinate the entire mission. Though none of the major CIS capital ships would be present during the Battle of Geonosis, or more accurately the evacuation of Geonosis by CIS leadership, days later General Worm Loathsome would head the Siege of Christophsis. in the CIS's hopes to cut off the Republic access to the Corellian Run, sending a fleet that included 23 Munificents, 6 Lucrehulks, and a Providence to coordinate them all. While the General would lead the fight planet-side, this particular Providence was the Invincible, the flagship of the infamous Admiral Trench. Republic Admiral Yularen recognized the Arch Admiral from before the war, at a time when Trench was the commander of corporate fleets. His command of this supersized Providence is evidence that he was the best admiral in the CIS. Anakin would attempt a rescue mission to Christophsis, and Trench showed why his style paired so well with this powerful dreadnought.
The command ship is bearing down on us!
Though the command ship, he sees that he can crush this smaller fleet of 3 Venators and 3 Pelta-class medical frigates. It's obvious that they are attempting a blockade run, not trying to clear out the entire blockade, and so he uses the ship's speed to close the gap in hopes of forcing them to retreat. The sheer firepower of the Venator demanded respect, so it isn't that Trench thinks this trio can't do anything to him, but by being so aggressive with this larger variant, he can make the Republic Admiral realize that there was no hope at just blowing through a gap in the blockade. Best case, they would lose most of their ships just engaging this single Providence. When Kenobi arrives with his Venator, the Negotiator, he assures his Padawan that they had a secret weapon, and they need to retreat for now. Frustrated, Skywalker does comply, and Republic forces retreat behind the moon. T-Series droid TI-99 recommended they pursue, but Trench disagrees.
They are escaping. Should we go after them? No! Our orders are to blockade, not chase. I have won this round. Recycle the shields and let the cannons reset to a full charge.
He knows the biggest advantage is the thermal shielding, and the power of those heavy cannons and torpedoes. The prototype stealth ship would emerge from behind the moon and pass right by the Munificents on its approach to Christophsis, while Trench was ordering the bombers to be launched to finish off Bail Organa's Republic forces. This worked to pressure Kenobi to rush to Bail's defense and engage, which leads both Skywalker and Yularen to agree that Kenobi was wrong here, that Trench was baiting him, and though Skywalker is the only one crazy enough to think to use the stealth prototype against this supersized dreadnought.
Sir?
You heard me, Admiral.
What are you doing?
And even Trench is surprised.
This is unusual. What can they be planning?
Minutes later, he can tell something is off, and spots the ship the second it decloaks.
There! A cloaked ship!
The Republic knew to target the command bridge right up front, but the shielding did its job.
Your puny torpedoes are no match for my thermo shields.
While the cannon fire tries to hit them, and Trench can tell by this expert piloting that his enemy is a Jedi pilot, not a clone. The ship was able to go stealth again, and Trench knows he just has to wait, while also launching some psychological weapons.
You have an impressive new vessel, but I warn you, I have dealt with its kind before.
Whether it is personal cloaks or these cloak shipping technologies, there have been a long history of their use, but they were never that widespread. Trench's experience defending corporate space was invaluable, seeing all sorts of odd tactics and technologies from various star systems, and he's likely the only person on either side to have had history taking out cloaked ships.
Maybe he's tracking the magnetic signature.
The only way to test this theory was to let the missiles get a lock on them, and when the clone engineers confirmed that it was via magnetic signature, as the stealth ship turns towards them, the smaller craft was not as easy to hit with the heavy turbolasers, and was so fast that within seconds it was barreling towards the bridge, and Trench knew his only hope was with the shielding.
Raise the shields!
We cannot. The shields are still recharging.
Made to slug it out in capital ship battles, the enemy ship wasn't supposed to be able to close the gap in between shield generation, something that proved fatal when faced against the brazen tactics of a smaller, faster craft. And once the Invincible was out of the fight, the blockade quickly became disorganized and the Republic was able to protect their allies on world. A year later, the CIS was going on a war crime spree, using smaller fleets anchored by a Providence to conduct hit-and-run attacks on Republic medical space stations throughout the galaxy. It might seem like an odd role for the powerful Dreadnought, but morality aside, it was a creative use of its overwhelming power and speed, popping out of hyperspace, blasting right through whatever shielding it had, without much concern for smaller defense forces, and then slipping away through the blue void. Grievous would lead the assault on Kamino, but not from the invisible hand, though this unnamed Providence would take up the intended role as a command ship for the overall fleet, serving the same role during the Battle of Sullust, where Sidious ordered Dooku to execute his assassin. The CIS ships focused their fire on this Providence in an attempt to kill her. They're again seen using their overwhelming power to capture Even Peel, and later used to capture AUDIBLE by boarding her Venator, before blowing it apart with this same trio of ships tactic that we saw with the hit and runs on medical stations. This isn't confirmed, but perhaps smaller Providence-led fleets were launched to blitz any Republic assets caught lacking a sufficient fleet. Intel Sidious often linked to Dooku, so these ship trios were acting like special forces, assassin/kidnapping squads. When the Umbaran seceded and threw in with the CIS, an enormous fleet was rapidly deployed here to establish a blockade, which, though not perfect, the blockade greatly restricted the forces that were able to make it on-world, causing the Battle of Umbara to be one of the bloodiest for the Republic, with officers on the Providence coordinating the dozens of support craft that filled the skies. And though in the Battle of Dathomir we don't really see much of the orbital support, Dooku and Grievous weren't playing around when it came to ending the Night Sisters, sending a fleet with 4 Munificents, 2 Requisants, 2 supply ships, and a Providence, all to end a tribe of witches with no navy. When the CIS developed an encryption module that allowed them to crack Republic transmission codes, they placed it inside a powerful Dreadnought with a full fleet of support, connecting the module to an excellent suite of sensors and hyperwave transmitters to try and track Republic movement all across the galaxy. The super tactical droid Otto was the commander of this fleet and had his prize tech stolen when D Squad infiltrated the Providence. By 20 BBY, Grievous's well-honed blitz method got him the greatest win yet, destroying the flagship of his archenemy Kenobi when they swarmed his ship and forced the Jedi to set it to blow after being overwhelmed. A year later, we see 5 of them in defense of Ringovinda, and Dooku would arrive in his personal fleet to force Clovis's hand in a move that would end up pressuring the Republic to take control of the banks. When Skywalker's fleet arrives, Dooku fled and what could have been an epic but deadly space battle was avoided. In the final months of the war, it would act as the command ship for Grievous's assault on Maul's Shadow Collective, and then Trench's final battle over Anaxis. The Republic shipyards here were some of the most important in the galaxy, and after escaping death over Christophsis and surviving the Battle of Ringovinda, his new flagship, the Invulnerable, was leading the assault with 2 other Providence Dreadnoughts, 7 Munificents, 2 Requisants, and 6 Omni support vessels. This assault would last for weeks, with Trench's secret weapon being the strategy algorithm designed by Rex and extracted by Echo, the clone who was thought long dead but had been reduced to a husk, a biological computer hooked up to a CIS system that would mine his mind for valuable Republic intel. When Echo was recovered, and Skywalker with Clone Force 99 were able to sneak onto the flagship, Trench was finally killed, and the Jedi used the Providence-class's self-destruct feature to turn its sheer size and reactors against the fleet, igniting a chain reaction as debris from the Invulnerable barraged all the allies in its path. In what would prove to be the final days of the war, space battles were increasing along major hyperroutes, and reinforcements were sent to crush Plo Koon in the 442nd Siege Battalion's push to liberate Cato Neimoidia, which was followed by the single largest battle of the war, when over 1,000 CIS craft, led by Grievous upon the Invisible Hand, took this blitz tactic to another level. Just like how it worked to take out med stations and kidnap Jedi generals, scaled up, the principles were the same. The relatively untested Coruscant home defense fleet was quickly rendered useless, as Grievous barreled through the orbital defenses, down into the atmosphere, and captured the Supreme Chancellor. Getting him back into the Invisible Hand, the supposedly most powerful man in the galaxy was now in restraints, at the mercy of Grievous and Dooku. Just as Sidious planned, the Republic's Open Circle fleet, along with Kenobi and the Chosen One, would arrive just in time to cut off the CIS escape. After navigating through clouds of droid fighters, they were able to deactivate the deflector shields that protected the hangar, and make their way through the ship. Dooku didn't realize that his beheading was also right in line with the plan, but the broadside volley from the Venator Gwalara shook things up, blasting through the massive Dreadnought and setting off proton bombs to create a chain reaction that caused the repulsor fields and power systems to fail, sending the ship into a nosedive as it was no longer countering the gravitational effects of Coruscant. And you can see a glimmer of the shielding struggling to keep up. As it plummeted, loose ships and massive MTTs were launched across the hangar, but reversing the stabilizers and Grievous's quick call,
Fire the emergency booster engines!
did help to level out the ship, and he used the in-ship security features like ray shields and droidicas to help capture these Republic VIPs. While the fight in the command bridge resulted in Grievous's escape through the window, forcing an emergency viewport wall to engage to seal the room, and the cyborg would get away by launching all of the escape pods at once, in order to minimize his odds of being shot down or captured. But as the Invisible Hand kept barreling through the atmosphere, more systems were failing, and the entire aft section rips away, leaving only that original central tube that the rest of the Providence tubes are built around. This main section is expertly set down by the galaxy's best pilot for what only could be described as
another happy landing.
While Coruscant celebrated the heroic rescue of their beloved leader, roughly 250,000 people were killed by the falling debris of the Invisible Hand, mostly this main back section, which could have easily taken out several skyscrapers. And symbolic of the charade of war, once the dust cleared, the Emperor was on his throne, and Republic and CIS craft all went to the same grave, on the junkyard world of Braca. Enormous efforts went into dismantling all sorts of ships, and this is a breeding ground for corruption and black market opportunities. The Invincible and Lucid Voice ended up here, and with some clever and covert movements, Birch Teller's rebel group were able to Frankenstein themselves a smaller but still powerful version of a Providence. This was long before the unified Rebel Alliance, and this group was light years ahead of other Resistance fighters who were using an odd laser cannon or have a good slicer in their midst. This Teller Providence was 920 meters long and had 12 turbolasers, 10 point defense ion cannons, and 6 proton torpedo launchers. Perhaps even if they could have stolen more than this, they likely wanted to keep it as streamlined as possible, so that they actually had enough fuel and munitions to use it. Pure efficiency, it must have been the most powerful Rebel craft sailing the stars at this time, 14 BBY. Throw in that the Empire wasn't expecting anything like this, and you can see why they were able to get away with Grievous's old strategy for some time before it came to the attention of Tarkin. Because outside of that firepower, their comms and sensor jamming suites were still functional, and used to cut off communications for backup, stop the spread of propaganda, and slice into holowave transmitters to broadcast the true events of Imperial war crimes, stuff the news would never cover. While other times their armament was used to just blow up the hyperwave transmitters, there must have been countless rebels that would have been indirectly saved by these efforts, without even knowing who Birch Teller was or what his gang was up to, just thanking the force that stormtrooper backup never showed, or some TIE fighter patrol peeled off to deal with this mysterious communications failure. But with the attack on Sentinel Base, the secret Death Star construction facility that Tarkin was in charge of, he would get to figuring out who this enemy was, and knew that some of the IDs from the Clone Wars era must have still been in these Frankenstein parts.
Analysis of data received by the Command Center's friend or foe indicator confirms that the capital ship is a downsized version of a separatist Providence-class cruiser carrier, modified with modules taken from CIS frigates and destroyers, which the SEPs, usually mounted aft rather than forward, appear to have come from the cruiser Lucid Voice.
And as you might expect, Tarkin made sure that they would pay, and this respectable foe was added to Tarkin's long list of vanquished enemies, with the ship being destroyed in 14 BBY at the Gulf of Tatooine. Though there was at least one more Providence, this being the dedicated carrier variant that came into the naval forces of the Alliance to restore the Republic, the now unified Rebel force, and it was painted with their bold red color. So that's it for the breakdown. As for behind the scenes facts, this original cross-section is actually a source of a lot of canon material, like having the first mention of the Lucid Voice, as well as a ton of other details on how the ship works. The design was inspired by Zeppelins, and this sound was meant to reference the unique Zeppelin sound. Some depictions in video games put the bridge all over the place, from being in the center to the top of the spire, and this is one of the few ships or vehicles that had their stats dramatically changed from Legends to canon, almost double the speed, but my points earlier about it being surprisingly fast still stand, and even in Legends it was still faster than the Venator. And if you want to look into it more, a lot of these details come from these books. So that's it for the Providence-class Dreadnought. Become a member to help support us and unlock those perks, while hitting that like button, commenting down below, sharing the video, and subscribing if you want to see more are all great ways to help out too. But most important of all, remember, the Force has a love of irony, so make sure your ship has a humble name, and the Force will be with you, always.